Dear Mr. Minister, dear colleagues, dear partners of New Europe Center, this is our greatest pleasure to launch our today's event. And this event is called Diplomacy 2021, Governments, Priorities, Expectations of Ukrainian Society. And actually, we are going to discuss these major topics mentioned, expectations of Ukrainian society and priorities of the government, and to what extent these priorities and expectations meet, whether they strengthen each other or whether they do not coincide with each other, and they are in contradiction to each other. And today we have Mr. Minister Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. This very event is conducted in partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are grateful for that, and thank you for understanding to what extent this cooperation with analytical centers, Ukrainian analytical centers, is important. And if Mr. Minister begs my pardon, this very event is going to be started not with the government's priorities, but with the expectations of society, because there are various opinions as regards to what extent the society shall influence the external policy, the foreign policy, and we sincerely believe that foreign policy is going to be much more efficient if there is understanding of the actions of the authorities in the society, and it will be even more efficient if society supports such actions, which is why I would like to give the floor to Mr. Serhiy Solodky at first, a colleague from the New Europe Center who is going to present the results of the all-national survey which was conducted by InfoSapiens agency as regards priorities and expectations of Ukrainian society in terms of foreign policy. And as you've noticed, Diplomacy 2021 is the name, meaning we are going to discuss today not what was already done, but what shall be done. We will not be summarizing anything, though this is the end of the year and there is the great temptation to do so, but we will try to plan the foreign policy. Thank you, Alyona. Greetings to all the participants of this event. And Alyona is completely right. We were concentrated on the future, which is why we asked Ukrainians in what way to act and in what way they treat this or that step or decision. So there were 10 questions. I can not actually highlight all the results, and I urge everyone to get familiarized with the publication at our website, the website of New Europe Center. The publication is right after the event. And I would like to ask technical support to have the slides with the key figures, with the key data of this survey. So, number one, we've asked about the priorities of the foreign policy, and so we see economic diplomacy ranked first. So Ukrainians believe that we have to prioritize the issue of winning markets for Ukrainian producers. Also in top three, we have good cooperation by way of strategic partnerships with other countries of the world, Great Britain, United States, etc. And also in top three priorities, we see Western orientation, European integration. We've asked Ukrainians, why is it important to prioritize a values-based approach rather than other approaches whenever passing some decisions? Well, it was very relevant against the background of the political electoral crisis in Belarus. So 37% Almost 38% of Ukrainians believe that Ukrainian politicians shall combine both approaches, value-oriented approach and mercantile approach. Speaking about mercantile approach, just 26%, almost 26% of Ukrainians support that. We have quite a good balance here between the pure value-oriented and mercantile approach. Ukrainians still support our orientation at Europe, a membership in the EU. So in total, we see that almost 67% of Ukrainians support EU membership and 48.4% of Ukrainians support NATO membership. We asked Ukrainians whom Ukrainians trust among foreign leaders. So, Angela Merkel is the leader in terms of public support in Ukraine. 60% of respondents mentioned they fully trust, or almost fully trust, the German Chancellor. And anti-leader, of course, is Vladimir Putin. Over 70% of Ukrainians distrust him. And traditionally, we've asked Ukrainians whether Ukraine needs continuing to implement European reforms or pro-European reforms, even if the EU does not offer the perspective of becoming a member of the EU. Over 60% believe that, yes, we need to implement Euro reforms because that's Ukraine who needs that. And Ukraine has no other choice. And the same question was asked 2 years ago, and the figure is the same. So the pro-European reforms need to be implemented. The next slide, please. So, also we asked as regards expectations from the United States of America after the presidential elections. And what ranked first? That was security guarantees. Also, we asked what you expect from the European Union, and we see that expectations are more related to the economic bloc and well-being. Well, Ukrainians expect that flow of investors will be boosted. Creation of jobs in Ukraine, that would be the benefit also. We've asked Ukrainians, well, there was the set of questions which were related to countering Russian aggression. We asked if Ukraine neglects its hopes to be part of EU and NATO, whether Russia will cease its aggression. But Ukrainians, almost 60% of Ukrainians, do not believe that Russia will cease its aggressive policy towards Ukraine if the latter abandons its willingness to join EU and NATO. Also, we've asked whose assistance and help is the most tangible in terms of countering Russian aggression. United States ranks first. And in top 5, we see European Union, also Germany, Poland, and Canada. And the range of issues pertained to peacekeeping mission of United Nations in Ukraine. We were asking whether it's necessary to make the negotiations process more active and to promote this issue of peacekeepers in the eastern Ukraine. 36.7% believe that Ukraine should resume vigorously promoting the idea of deploying a UN peacekeeping mission in the entire territory of Donbass. And some believe we need to give up a range of expectations. For example, these peacekeepers may be located just at the demarcation line, contact line, at the front line, but there are not that many of such Ukrainians, just 20%. And if we have a look at the general picture, majority still believes we shall not give up positions in this. And we've asked also about this mild force of Ukraine, or image of Ukraine, attractiveness of Ukraine for foreigners. And we were asking the same questions in other countries of Europe. And we've asked Ukrainians, what do you think? What 3 major associations with Ukraine are there abroad? And Ukrainians believe the 3 major associations would be poverty, war with Russia, and corruption. So, the same association associations, if you remember, were highlighted by our research, our survey. Well, war ranked first, poverty ranked second, then there was immigration, seasonal workers, and in Ukrainian survey, we see also immigrants, but it had a positive connotation, like hard-working Ukrainians who work in Western countries. But what draws our attention, we got used that Ukrainians, well, that's the last thing I say, are very pessimistic. But no, the survey showed Ukrainians are very optimistic because there were a lot of positive associations and plenty of optimism, like hard-working people, embroidered shirts, Ukrainian cuisine, Euromaidan. Well, actually, the survey conducted in the European countries, there were not that many of these optimistic associations, but, well, actually, that was my key message. And I strongly hope that speakers read the results of the survey and maybe they will get concentrated on the figures they got interested in and they will comment on what I was mentioning just now. Thank you, Serhiy. Mr. Minister, tell us frankly, have you known something or you've just felt that economic diplomacy is believed to be the key priority by Ukrainians? And that is something you are making a huge emphasis. Am I right? So I would like to also learn what inspired you most, or what surprised you, or demotivated you most. And of course, I would like to hear briefly about top 3 key priorities of the foreign policy for 2021. In what way you see that? Ukrainian foreign policy 2021, what it's all about. Thank you so much. So, I was not doubting even for a second when I received an invitation from Ms. Hetmanchuk to participate in this event. Which is why, because, well, what is contained in these publications, in this specific publication, we always lacked it. Ukrainian diplomacy lacked this clear-cut understanding of the societal expectations. I'm not a proponent that you have to get synchronized with the wishes of the civil society, with all due respect to the civil society, of course. Well, because there are some historical prerequisites to all that. But we have to get oriented at the expectations of the society, what they expect of you. And their aspirations, well, it helps. It helps significantly in our work. And it would be great if such a survey becomes a systemic process for us to track the dynamics of the moods, of the vision of the society. And I was glad. I'm not going to conceal that. That, you know, what I started doing as a minister on some intuitive level is now confirmed by figures of this survey that that Ukrainians really want diplomats to pay more attention to support Ukrainian export in the world. And let us add involvement of investments, bringing investments to Ukraine. Well, of course, here we talk about the cultural transformation or cultural shift. And when communicating with ambassadors, I noticed these cultural peculiarities. Everybody is saying, yes, export is good. But some specific Mr. Ambassador believes that their task would be to give a presentation into the hands of the investor and just go away. And that's not a problem what the investor is going to do with that presentation. Someone saying, yes, we have to support Ukrainian companies. We have to, I don't know, join our efforts with the companies of the Western countries. But we've given the Ukrainian company the email, right, of the company, and they have to deal with that. So there are some cultural differences, you know, and we have to take all that into account and act appropriately. And this survey and these figures we have, of course, they will help us in our activities, especially now, because on Thursday there is going to be a Ukrainian ambassadors conference. That's a huge event. It takes place once every 2 years. And we're going to use the data we are making public today when working with ambassadors to orient them appropriately. I wasn't stunned by anything. In general, I'm satisfied with the results, and I see that we are more or less synchronized with the Ukrainian society. Of course, there are some interesting dilemmas, like value-oriented approach or mercantile approach. We can talk about this for ages, but I believe values are important. They are fundamental. But at the very same time, to be just value oriented, well, you can do that only if you have pockets full of money and your security is guaranteed. But if you don't have these privileges, you shall be mercantile in certain approaches and in certain decisions you approach. I'm glad that for Ukrainians, Angela Merkel is the role model, not the president of Belarus, because, well, I remember the level of his popularity a few years ago. So that's great that we see this shift, these changes in the beliefs of Ukrainian society. I'm glad about that as well. This means that we are proceeding to European integration on a more profound level. But Ms. Merkel, well, showed or proved herself to be a real leader in under the conditions of pandemics, and Ukrainians trust her and like her. There are figures which, well, not made me cautious. Well, can we have a look at the second slide? At the second slide. I want to quote some figures there. Yeah. So, yes, I believe that number 7 is a very important result. We lived within this myth, like, let us, I don't know, abandon some willingness of ours. That's not the right way. And I don't think it's rational to expect that Russia will cease its aggressive policy towards Ukraine if the latter abandons its willingness to join the EU and NATO. No, that's absurd. It won't strengthen a foreign policy opposition in general whenever we are talking about countering Russia's aggression against their country. And speaking about 2021, well, of course, we are going to move to move forward as society expects us. But speaking about me, I've noticed several topics which were underdeveloped in 2020. Well, maybe we did not work on them that actively because we were working actively on other topics, and we are going to discuss all those other topics. And on the 22nd of December, we are going to have the Diplomacy Day. Thank you for all your congratulations and wishes. So, the topic of countering Russia's aggression at all the fronts is going to be top priority. Then launch of Crimean platform. It's going to be a new element in all the architecture of countering Russia's aggression. And I was told that you have among the figures something about Crimean platform. Am I right? Yes. So I'm very glad that as far as Ukrainian society expects something like this, 20-something or 30% positively assess the initiative as regards creation of this Crimean platform. So this is not that popular topic, and I believe this is a huge figure already, almost 30% of Ukrainians. So society believes that the state of Ukraine is not doing enough for deoccupation of Crimea. And this is going to be the year of Ukrainians living abroad. We are going to work very seriously on, so to say, on boosting the cooperation with Ukrainians living abroad. And we are going to keep on moving along the Asian track. We are going to deal with Africa issues and cooperation. We've conducted a lot of analytical work as regards Africa, and these analytics will turn into policies now. And we strongly believe that we are going to have some breakthroughs in our cooperation with countries from the Asian region, Latin America. We are going to actively work on that. But speaking about something new, that was something I voiced out. Ukrainians living abroad, Crimea, new geographical relevations. And I want our diplomacy, to follow the expectations of Ukrainians. On one hand, we have to lead the country ahead, and we know where we are leading it. We are bringing it to the West in terms of values, in terms of laws, to the European, cultural space, legal space. And for that purpose, we are using not just, some well-known forwards, Euro integration, NATO integration, but we are also creating some new dimensions which are bringing us closer to all the countries which are to the west of our border. And this year we've created Lublin Triangle. There was this small pause in its development because at first Polish minister was replaced by another. But we've talked to a colleague from Latvia, and everybody confirmed that this is a very important project.
And we shall establish new networks in order to have Ukraine closer intertwined with the European context. Definitely, one other topic is going to be at the forefront of our attention next year. That is our cooperation with the United States. That is absolutely interesting. At the same time, I am convinced that this cooperation will make Ukraine even stronger, and our cooperation will be even more profound. So I'm grateful for this survey, and I truly hope that this will become a regular survey, allowing us to understand any shifts in the ideas and the perceptions of the society, so that we would know where do we need to communicate with the society better, while at the same time we would also learn about the priorities of our society for us to take them into consideration in our foreign efforts. So thank you very much. We shall continue our cooperation with the analytics centers in order to make our foreign policy even more effective. Thank you, Mr. Minister. I would like to once again remind you that we have a discussion today. And so I would like to welcome all of the speakers to maintain a 5-minute deadline. And we have a lot of people watching us online, so we want to keep their attention, and therefore we need to be very concise. We also have a special hashtag for our activity, that is the Diplomacy 2021. So you can use the Twitter, you can cite, you can introduce commands on our activities. And now I'd like to pass the floor to the next speaker, the plenipotentiary ambassador of Germany to Ukraine. And we had no doubts about whom to invite among the foreign ambassadors to participate in this discussion, not only because Anka knows Ukraine a lot and she knows how to speak with a single language at any platforms. Besides, this survey is a positive information to the relationship between the Ukraine and Germany, maybe someone would be really surprised to see Chancellor Angela Merkel as the leader among the foreign leaders with the greatest trust among the society, among the people of Ukraine. And Lukashenko scored worse in this survey. He is now ranking fourth among the other leaders. But Germany is the leading country currently in terms of the views of our society, as many Ukrainians underline Germany as one of the top priorities for cooperation. And this is something really unexpected. And speaking about the countries who supported to deter Russian aggression, and Germany once again has become one of the top three countries who supported Ukraine to counter Russian aggression, as believed by the Ukrainians. And really, this is something that means recognizing Germany not only as the supporter, but the ally as well. So, Your Excellency, what signal will you bring to Germany? Or maybe you've already communicated the results of this survey to Germany, and maybe some of your impressions or recommendations how to make our cooperation not a situational but a strategic one, how this could reinforce our cooperation, how this could reinforce the perceptions of Ukrainians towards Germany. I know that Germany has no problems with soft power, but still, your comments on this aspect. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Alona. I'm sorry for being a bit late. I know that it's important for Germans to be on time, but unfortunately, this didn't happen today.
Because it will be slightly more easy for me. You see a very happy ambassador this morning, I have to say. I mean, what can be more encouraging for an ambassador in the country you serve to see such results of a public opinion as we've seen this morning? It's not only the fact that Ukrainians appreciate Angela Merkel so much. What really, and you mentioned that, Alyona, I found encouraging was that Ukrainians want to see Germany as their strategic partner, and not only a small majority, but a huge majority. In that respect, I have to say I'm also happy to see that the priorities that we set in supporting Ukraine's reform agenda are totally in line with the expectations of the Ukrainian people that reflect in the poll. Fighting corruption is a concrete stepping stone on the way to closer integration with EU, and it's definitely something where we are all also very engaged in. How can we make our cooperation really strategic? I think honestly it is from our side already strategic. We have a clear set of goals, what we would like to achieve in Ukraine, or how we would want to be perceived in Ukraine. Is first of all and foremost, and also for me personally, is really our support for Ukraine's territorial integrity. You all know that I've been here when Russia invaded Ukraine, and this is for me also a personal issue. But it is also German government policy to stand side by side with Ukraine on the path of ending this war in the east, of finding ways how to a solution. And this is a long and thorny way. And my colleagues in Berlin, sometimes I admire their patience, who are working on a daily basis to find new little things where we can perhaps at least advance a little bit more on the way here towards peace. This will not be over tomorrow, I'm afraid, but with Germany you have a partner that is looking at a long-term engagement. This is something very German, by the way. We're not looking for quick wins. We look for a long-term partnership. This year, I think I cannot not mention it, is the fight against the pandemic, against COVID, that has brought some kind of nationalism in some countries. Germany always was of the opinion that we have to also help our partners. From a European point of standpoint, we want a vaccine achievable, accessible for all, also for Ukraine. Ukraine is part of this vaccine initiative, COVAX, and will get doses from there. And I do hope that we can also do more once we understand how the vaccination process will go in the EU. In terms of other subjects, you asked me to keep it short, so I'm just going to mention the issues where we do want to continue our already, I think, quite deep cooperation. This is first and foremost in the reform process, two reforms: decentralization, which is on a good path where we have already invested 5 years, and I was very happy, and some of the partners in Germany were even surprised how many Hromadas voluntarily united up to the deadline. This is rather unusual. We have seen different processes in other countries. Now it is important to enshrine this reform in the constitution according to the principles of the European Charter of local self-government, and it is of utmost importance that the Hromadas can rely on a financing that they know will come every year, so that they can actually make plans for implementation, the priorities that their citizens have. The other reform, and I have been pretty outspoken about that lately, is justice reform. I know that the minister next to me sometimes looks a little bit pained when we speak about justice reform. I think it is, next to decentralization, the reform that will fundamentally change Ukraine, and I see a chance in this rather catastrophic decision of the Constitutional Court, mainly that it pushed us all to focus more on this reform. And perhaps last but not least, two more concrete issues. This is the energy partnership. We have just signed a memorandum of understanding in the sector of energy. We have had the first energy day, first Ukrainian-German energy day with companies. This is so important. You were talking about economic diplomacy. Companies are important in that respect. Government-to-government action in economics will in the end not lead anywhere if the companies are not going along with it. And in that respect, of course, also in the energy sector, we do hope that the investment climate in Ukraine will improve, so that our companies that are really interested do come here and implement their ideas, mainly in such, how to say, future pointing sectors like as hydrogen. And the other one, probably agriculture, just to finish that, the land market reform has, according to us, one of the major reforms that have been started here. It is also still on a path that I think can be improved, but we have loads of German farmers here who have already been working for more than 10 years and who want to continue their work and want to make Ukrainian agriculture more effective, more productive, so that you have an even better export product to sell in the world. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, пані посол.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. And now I'd like to pass the floor to the next speaker, Mr. Alexander Sushko. And this is the right moment to express words of gratitude to the International Foundation Reconnaissance and the Embassy of Sweden for the support they have provided to this survey, as it was made in the frames of the initiative of the Sweden Embassy. And I would like to also mention that European Pravda is the main supporter of this activity. So, Alexander, I have a question to you in the frames of our survey. You've did a lot of work on the Ukraine integration to the European Union, bringing Ukraine closer to the European Union. And we have a lot of questions in our survey regarding the European Union, starting with the European vector as it is, and all as it goes until the expectations of Ukrainians with the European Union. So Ukrainians have already identified the roles for the European Union, for the United States. The United States is most for security, for support, greater engagement in settling the conflict in Donbas, while the European Union is all about the economics. So whenever the Ukrainians are asked about their expectations from the European Union, they would say more employment for Ukrainians, more investors, more expectations for the Ukrainian economy. Or when we are asking Ukrainians what would become an indicator of the Ukrainian movement towards the European Union. Now, most of the Ukrainians say that an increase of economic situation, a greater situation with the welfare would mean that we have become closer to the European Union. So, do you think this should be the case for a successful integration of Ukraine with the European Union, or this society has a sort of misunderstanding in terms of the European integration? What should it provide for? What outcomes should there be? And definitely, if there are any other aspect in this survey that you're impressed with or that made you demotivated, please share that with us. Thank you, Olena. Thank you, dear colleagues. Indeed, it was very interesting for me to learn about the results of this survey, and the ideologists have prepared the very right list of questions, trying to identify that the diplomacy should be based on the social needs, properly learned and properly interpreted. And this is so great that we have so many analysts, experts, leaders of the national diplomacy working in Ukraine. We have just the right people here to analyze the survey results. And should we speak about the overall results of this survey, that clearly demonstrates that European and the Western factor remains very topical for the majority of the Ukrainian society, and therefore the strategic alliance with the collective West would be absolutely natural to the majority of the Ukrainian population, and there is a demand for that. Now, there are a lot of questions with regards to the contents, forums, and mechanisms for such a strategic alliance. At the same time, we do have the basic results already that demonstrate that we should continue moving forward in this direction, which is pretty stable results if we could compare the survey results over the previous decade, or at least 7 years. The figures we might get are pretty much stable, and we might have certain fluidity on the national landscape, but the survey we get, they demonstrate a fairly stable results, which allow us to jump to the conclusion that these are truly fundamental to the Ukrainian society, and they could be really the the aspect that could show that we are moving the right direction. And now there is a need to move forward to have a better understanding about the importance and the essence of those social demands, because further clarifications might bring up certain interesting details which might not be absolutely clear and transparent. And going back to the contents of this very activity, and how would you interpret the answers of the Ukrainian society? So the people consider the European factor as the most important bit. What are the associations with regards to this European factor? I believe that such an interpretation of a European vector on the part of Ukrainians is fairly natural, because Europe is still associated with the positive example of a successive society to the Ukrainians. And that guarantees a proper level of welfare, opportunities for self-development, and opportunities for a society without such a vast level of poverty, with more opportunities for every ordinary people, with more welfare opportunities, with better social benefits, with better social support, which is fairly good for Ukrainians.
And we understand that within the recent decade, Ukraine ceased to be a golden showcase, so to say. And having a look at this surveys 10 or 15 years ago, we saw a more idealistic perception of this actually Ukrainian vector. Europe was perceived as this golden showcase, which was just an ideal image of life, of properly built society. Now, currently, in the mass media, we have plenty of critical and negative information highlighting various crisis phenomena in the Western society in general, in Europe. Ukrainians still trust and have this good perception of European style of life and their values frame. They keep on associating it all with a successful society. It shows us that this trust is of higher quality compared to what we had before. At least this is my conclusion. Even when we see there is some negativeness, we are still positive about it. And we have to understand that this strategic trust of Ukrainian society to alliance with the Western world is based on three pillars, three components. That would be security, meaning the need in an ally in case of potentially endless conflict with Russia. The second pillar would be, some transformation and shift. That's a transformational vector to move the country into certain direction towards European standards of the political system, societal system, etc. And third pillar would be that high level of achievability or, I don't know, economic welfare, getting rid of poverty, marginalization of the citizens. And these three pillars are interrelated, of course, and it's obvious that there are a lot of small things. I have no opportunity to talk about it now, but we often discuss the issue: to what extent Europe shall keep on being driver of external transformations of internal transformations in Ukraine. We shall also pay attention to another fact, that under the conditions when the citizens of Ukraine are quite critical towards these results of reforms in Ukraine, regardless of the fact whether pro-Western or pro-Russian governments implement these reforms, they are still critical. They are still critical as regards perception of European vector, and the opponents of these vectors in the informational space will be using any misfortunes in terms of reforms to attack this Western or pro-European vector of Ukraine. This is happening, and that's just a fact of our life. And the last thing I would like to tell you about, and we shall not forget about this, almost 30% of Ukrainians are Euro-skeptical. They have these anti-Western moods. And we have to be also aware that there are plenty of people trying to win them and lure them to their side. And actually, we don't have this stability, because 30%, that's quite a big share of Ukrainian society, which may shift here or there, or be used actually to hinder Ukraine moving towards Western values. But we have to understand it and actually be aware in what way to shape the messages, to formulate our messages, tailored especially for this segment of Ukrainian society, who would also like to see Ukraine a successful country, and the country with the high living standards, but somehow they don't associate these standards with the European vector. And that's something we shall take into account in all areas of work in our communication with society. Thank you so much, Mr. Alexander. And we are moving to Mr. Yevhen Libovitsky, partner of our center, without whom we wouldn't start even commenting the results of this survey. Mr. Yevhen. Well, unexpected questions. I would like to ask you about this balance of value-oriented approach and mercantile approach, because I know that the issue of values is close and dear to your heart. Ukrainians are quite pragmatic. They would like to have the public diplomacy, new markets for export as the key priority of foreign policy. That's a very important message as I see this. But on the other hand, they want Ukraine to take into account and be based on the values in its foreign policy, to have this balance. If we have a look at those answering the questions of the survey, whether Ukrainians shall be based on value-oriented approach or mercantile approach, well, there are more people in the society who stand for values. And once again, this would be the fall of Lukashenko, a very noisy one, as a symbol, as a good role model for Ukrainians in governing, in building the state. So, in what way to interpret it all properly from your point of view? And does it strengthen our foreign policy at all? And does it strengthen our position in the world, the positioning of Ukraine, so to say? Or no, it undermines it? What do you think? Well, okay, I'll try using the role of an expert to go beyond the political correct way of putting things. And let me mention that I'm always fascinated when strong people speak about values, because weak people usually appeal to the values. And the issue is as follows. It's very easy to talk about values when you are not in the crisis, when everything's fine. We actually define whether we stick to the values or no when life verifies these values in us, hitting us painfully. And in that sense, I would like to tell you, if we have a look at relations of Ukraine with the European Union, and if we have a look at Ukraine's relations with Russia and the United States, we, on the basis of this 30 years, clearly see who is where, who is who was a friend, and who had a knife stuck in our back, and who was creating some preconditions for expectations, and those expectations didn't come true. So this very survey was really useful. For me, there are two very important things. The first thing, what was mentioned by Mr. Alexander, we clearly see that we have the majority of society which is pro-Euro integration, pro-NATO membership. This gives us understanding what are the possible scenarios, political scenarios, especially taking into account that potentially in the next year we are looking in the eyes of a possible political crisis, and we understand that there is not even a serious discussion in what way Ukraine will look like after Zelensky. And presence of this understanding of a vector is very important. Then the second thing I believe is important, and for me it became the most important conclusion of this very survey, would be the following. There is a readiness for transformations, for shifts, which go hand in hand with the moods of European integration, even if we don't have Euro-integrational perspectives. Let me explain you why it's important. Our transformation would not be just institutional transformation, but also a cultural one. Cultural transformation would be years and decades and generations. And in this sense, the worst enemy of sustainability would be the speed. If we try to transform the country in a very speedy way, in a fast way, we will face the huge opposition, huge wave of opposition inside the country, and we will be like splitting the discourse, and we will be creating additional tensions. So this gradual change, well, if we have a look at sociology, for example, we see a linear dependence between the demographical data and liking the Euro-integrational vector. The younger the person is, the more they want to head towards the European values. And in this sense, we understand Ukraine is quite robust, and we manage to culturally adapt to that moment when we have to take some important decisions. And have a look in what way the situation is with the external enemy of Ukraine. Have a look at the situation with social spending, social securities. Well, so far, the voters of Ukraine are not that resistant to the tests with well-being. Well, the resources we currently have shall not be spent at once. We have to create institutions. We have to boost our capacities for future. And I believe, in this sense, what is important, on one hand, to see the contrast between the movement Ukraine without Kuchma, and in what way Ukrainians assess the situation in Belarus in a very intolerant way, like get rid of that Lukashenko at last. In Belarus, we see the process which took plenty of years in Ukraine. Now, a few other things I wanted to mention, and which are important. In the first place, I'd like to mention that New Europe Center contribution is very important, because the talk about foreign policy is brought to the new quality level. We are based on figures. We're not talking about opinions. We are talking about things which are based on arguments, and we can confirm everything with this data, with these figures. And this is that quality of discussion they don't have in plenty of countries of the post-Soviet space. And actually a lot of people work on that, to have that evidence base. And now we see an attempt to close that hole which we had in the most recent document concept of social policy. Plenty of experts were working on, and they did a great job, and that's a very interesting document. But I lacked one thing. Why do we need foreign policy? An answer to that. I lacked actually what we are based on as a society to start with. What task do we have for the diplomacy as a society? And here the problems start appearing, because having a look at other studies, I would say that diplomacy is a sphere which is related to plenty of myths. Society does not understand what institutions are responsible for what. For example, what the presidential office is responsible for, what the cabinet of ministers is responsible for, Ministry of Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, Vice Prime Minister on European integration. There are these misconceptions in the society. And diplomats are perceived as people who are drinking champagne in nice suits and are agreeing on something. And there is this threat which is out there to have this sign of equality between Euro-integrational progress and diplomats. The majority of activities and efforts here are not the job of diplomats. If there are no preconditions for the agreements between diplomats cannot do anything, or just very little. If we're talking about foreign policy, we see some other options, and society doesn't see those options. They don't see the configuration of various players, security sector players. They don't see the dynamics inside the European Union. And the public opinion is very random in Ukraine, and society doesn't know about, or at least didn't know, that somehow U.S. could have had this huge influence on our European integration aspirations. Well, the public opinion sees everything in statics, but we know the dynamics. We have to take care of our long-term perspectives, not to do something here and now, but do a lot for future, in term years from here perspectives, etc. And here, this is something interesting we saw from the survey. Some topics shouldn't have been that popular, like security, but security topic is present, and corruption. Corruption is an important topic, of course. I don't want us to say that corruption is not an important topic or protect corruption or whatever, but I'm telling you that public opinion to a great extent is also influenced by the public discussion in Ukraine. And I, as a member of the Supervisory Council of Public Television, may tell you that the public discourse is dependent on the influences which is out there, the influences of the political technologists, etc. So we have to properly interpret these answers of our society, and we can properly interpret them when we see the dynamics, when we go through crisis, when we go through some other. Thank you so much, Mr. Yevhen. And Mr. Alexei, you have an opportunity, so to say, to summarize this discussion, and I'd like to resort to you with a question as follows. So the bloc pertaining to Russia, to Donbass, because there are some interesting results. We saw the figure, and Mr. Minister Kuleba highlighted one important thing, and I can highlight it as well. 60% of Ukrainians believe that Russia will not stop even if Ukraine offers some or will neglect its desire to get integrated to NATO or EU. But there are other findings which do not send that nice signal. And there is a great share of Ukrainians who believe that we need to develop our relations with Russia as a key strategic priority, so to say. And there are 27% of these Ukrainians. I understand there were just several options, and the same people could have selected EU integration, NATO membership, and relations with Russia at the very same time, and making the relations with Asia more profound. Nevertheless, this is quite a high share. And if I may, 5 minutes for you. What stunned you, surprised you in this context? What we shall still work on? I don't know, on the side of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, using the presence of Mr. Minister. Maybe you have some recommendations for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for taking us closer to this very painful topics for us to discuss. At first, I would like to express words of gratitude to the European Centre for the survey, because it clearly shows that we are much better than we think of ourselves, that we hear from mass media sometimes, though it still underlines that we have certain challenges. There is a regional division, and if we'll dip deeper, we'll see certain discrepancies, but we shouldn't be very dramatic, because considerable changes have been introduced, and our aspirations with regards to EU, with regards to any other areas of cooperation, is something that become fluctuating, and there are different supporters. Hopefully these are not the supporters of Russian integration, but the supporters or the people voting to a neutral position. Still, I'd like to express words of gratitude for the neutral position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the readiness to listen to the perceptions of the society. And this is an absolutely unprecedented position. At the same time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was always ready to listen to the needs, and addressing to the ambassador, well, you should stay satisfied at this level that we have, because we have so many work to do. I remember one of your interviews, and it was named, "We're not talking about Yermak, we're talking to Yermak." And this is something that is absolutely important, because answering the questions of Ms. Alena going outside the diplomatic frames and having an expert discussion, we definitely have concerns with regard to the situation we have, to the negotiations we have, and the figures indicating the number of people thinking of conversations with Russia. And this is not something new, really. There are other surveys, like CNI survey, and they indicate that the trends or the beliefs of the Ukrainian society with regards to Russia are becoming more moderate once again. And this is also a thing that raises certain concerns. And it's very good that this survey has proven that Ukrainian society supports the idea of peacemakers. So the plan that somehow was turned into Plan B, and we understand that this would be absolutely difficult to implement this plan. And it's great that Ukrainian society is speaking not about the concessions, but about a UN peacemaking mission. It could be different mission. It could be either on the contact line or in the whole territory of Ukraine. And it's important to speak about it because the concern of experts lies in crossing the red lines in negotiations in Minsk, in the Normandy format. We understand this is not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to be responsible for that, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs takes the right position in that, as far as our understanding, although other structures provide some unexpected statements we cannot understand and realize, or statements identifying the need for clear signals. This is also important. And in conclusion, I'd like to speak about the associations with Ukraine, and this is not something absolutely new for me. I thought the fourth place after the war in corruption and Chernobyl, it appeared that it's a war, poverty, and emigration. So Chernobyl is not on the agenda, and the same for corruption. Corruption is also among the associations. What is important for us is that we failed to change this discourse, because we thought that after 2014, the Ukraine should be associated with the idea of democratic country, aspiring to become an EU member, fighting with corruption, fighting with the aggression. Well, we also understood that the Ukrainians thought that we would be associated with something worthier than that, because the European survey showed that corruption is only the takes the ninth rank in the list of associations. Yes, there is certain positive in that, but major point is that we are a democratic country in spite of our northern neighbor. And it shows that our society, as well as the public agencies and international partners, have to work more with the society opinions. We have to participate in a larger number of public forums, and truly the Germany is organizing a lot of these forums like Kiev Dialogue, the other forums and platforms. Unfortunately, the minister would need to leave in 8 minutes. Therefore, I'd like to pass the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Any comments you would like to introduce? And maybe we can take 1 or 2 very brief questions, if any available, so that Mr. Alexei Melnikov and Alexei Rozhnichenko could also introduce their final remarks and questions. Alexei Melnik, the Rosenkolb Center, would like to express words of gratitude for such an event. And the question is the following. You have mentioned the Crimean platform as the new activity for Diplomacy 2021. Is there anything else? Anything other new approaches with regards to Russia? And any long-term plans or perspectives for, let's say, for additional 10 years? Well, and thank you. I have a question to the Minister and to the Madam Ambassador. And we're talking about the economic diplomacy and the expectations of the society. And we're talking about the attraction of direct foreign investments. And it is clear that investments consider the security issue as one of the most challenging aspects. And in this respect, our integration to NATO would become of an utmost importance. So the question is, what is the current status with NATO? as this is the largest tool in our economic diplomacy. Would Germany be ready to support the Ukraine's becoming member to NATO? Because this will help German investors to come to Ukraine, because your goods, your commodities are great, but still more could be done. Mr. Minister, please. It's hard to plan something absolutely new with regards to Russia, because we already have a whole range of tools that we currently have and that we are currently implementing. We saw a gap. We saw a lack of process with regards to the Crimea, and many were sort of pessimistic regarding the success of this process. Still, the dynamics in support to this Crimean platform clearly shows that we have a lot of countries willing to support this Crimean platform. So it's more than enough for me as a sort of new tool with regards to Russia. Speaking about Russia in 10 years, and we don't know whether Russia will still be with Putin or not, I believe that the Ukrainian society is not ready to have a moderate or calm conversation with regards to Russia. Sometimes I talk to experts who are ready to have a neutral approach in the conversations with Russia, because we have to understand our geographical position. Yet I like the step made by the Institute of Strategic Researches, and they've published an article on that. And we have to start with expert discussions and closed circle, because there is too many emotions within the society for starting conversation with Russia. The people could be too enthusiastic with regards to their position to Russia, thinking that there will be no prosperity, no security with regards to Russia. And this is something we have to understand. Speaking of NATO, I agree that there is a direct connection between the security and investments. And I'd like to point that from a historical perspective, the diplomacy is created from a chemistry, from alchemy, and really your briefing brings new to this evolution. And an average Ukrainian, just as the average citizen of any other country, well, foreign affairs is something chaotic in his mind, and whenever there are certain pillars that they can rely upon, is something that is absolutely important. Therefore, those figures that we have received, they clearly demonstrate that there is something that we can rely on. The future of democracy is very hybrid. We're already talking about the hybrid threats, but indeed there are hybrid possibilities, and those who would be able to overcome, to muster those hybrid possibilities, now he will muster the foreign diplomacy. And our society, I guess, is not ready for such a process. We need to use the software, the economics, as they shall be the prevailing tools in the future diplomacy. I'm grateful to every one of you. I would really like to continue with this discussion, though I really need to move to another meeting. We have to be absolutely open for critical assessments, and I really want to use another word, fruitful commands, and we'd like to congratulate you with the Diplomacy Day. And really, it's I hope there will be more hits in the diplomacy of the Ukrainian. Well, what is even more important is the diplomacy is not about the blues, because that. Okay. Thank you. We still have 15 minutes at our disposal, and we would be absolutely happy to answer any of your questions, because I believe the speakers have more to say. There was a question to Anka Feldhusen, and if there are any other questions to our speakers or maybe comments, please let me know.
NATO and investment climate in Ukraine. I honestly think that German investors don't care a bit if Ukraine is a member of NATO or not to invest here. Of course, when the war started in 2014, our investors were worried at the beginning, but as far as I know, none of them left the country because of the war. We just showed that we have a big automotive cluster in Lviv, and we just showed to them, look, Donetsk is further away from Lviv than Berlin. So make up your mind if it's really a danger for you. So what our investors need is a level playing field where all companies enjoy the same rights and obligations. And they need to be sure that if there is a problem, if there is with competitors or with the state, they need to be able to go to court and have a fair trial in court. Let me even say, most of our companies win their court procedures when they go to court. It just takes so long, and Germany is based on small and medium enterprises. They do not have the money and the time to wait for a court ruling, even though it might be positive for them. So the question on NATO is really more a strategic question. There is a process between Ukraine and NATO that Germany supports. We have been very supportive for the granting of the Enhanced Opportunity Partnership. And this is what Germany is going to do in the future. See where Ukraine has possibilities to come closer to NATO. And then I think in the end it will be a rather natural process. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. Будь ласка.
Thank you. And any other comments or questions on the part of our audience? Catherine, please. Thank you. I have a question to Yevhen Klibovitsky. I feel that some of the experts and politicians are somehow uncertain about future relations with Russia. They believe that something may change in Russia. We don't know what. We don't know to what direction, but there is a feeling that some changes might occur. So I'd like to ask you, do you see any trends that would have an influence on that part of the world, particularly Russia, in the next 10 years? I know it's a very complicated question, and before the pandemics, nobody would ever think of planning something like that, but I would really like to have your comments. Any other people willing to answer this question? Or maybe you would like to introduce more comments? Well, I'm not sure that I can set the priorities for Russia right away, but I can give an overall direction. Putin is clear and understandable threat, and any change will bring a portion of uncertainty to the table. And Russia after Putin, or any further developments in Russia, particularly with regards to its imperial ambitions, would have a significant impact on Ukraine, because I'm afraid this is just the case when the pragmatic approach would win this value-oriented approach. We'll see how this Northern Stream 2, it was a large issue for the discussions for Germany, and if not for the opponents of this process, this would already something that have occurred. Still, we see that there is a support to the integrity of Ukraine. We have the support of the sovereignty and political support to Ukraine. Still, the Crimea is occupied, the east of Ukraine is occupied, and there is not an end to that process in the clear future. And it will be absolutely complicated to try and somehow think of what would be the situation in future. And I will try to configure our relationship with the West in the way that we would effectively use our own advantages, because sometimes the Ukrainians speak about something and then face the reaction as if the Ukrainian institutions are unstable, are not reliable, and so this expression that they have, or their statements that they have, they're thought to be irreliable. And in some cases, Ukrainians fail to provide their statements to the West.
And the second thing would be that we need these closed discussions. This very document should have been discussed without public in a closed room, so to say. Well, because it's very important to exchange our expert opinions behind the closed doors. I believe we lack that significantly. We are losing because of geography. We cannot dig this big, long hole between Ukraine and Russia and have crocodiles there. So we need to understand what kind of options are there, and we do not discuss these options as an expert community. And it's important for these discussions to go beyond the expert community, because they touch, I don't know, those working within demographics, economy, business, etc. So this is a more profound discussion, a more extensive discussion, and I'm afraid that we don't have enough of these discussions, but we are making right steps in the right direction. So why am I saying it's important for us not to try to speed it all up? Because if we try implementing a discussion earlier than we are ready for this discussion, it will be a problem. Thank you, Mr. Yevhen. It really makes sense to organize this closed discussion of this very survey and a survey we've ordered in Germany, France, Italy, and Poland, because, well, I believe we need to see the whole picture, the comprehensive picture. Yes, there are plenty of materials we are not publicly discussing. Yes, we shall do that at the very beginning of the next year. Mr. Sergei Sidorenko, you had a short question. Or a remark. Yes, a question. So, a question in the first place to Madam Ambassador Feldhus and whoever is willing to say. So Mr. Minister Kuleba mentioned this Crimean platform as a priority in terms of Russian policy in the recent future. So far, I don't have a clear-cut understanding what we can achieve. What is an attainable goal of Ukraine within the framework of the Crimean platform within the recent future? We are realistic, right? We understand that we can not have this goal in the short-term perspective that Russia will just leave those territories. Do you, in the diplomatic corps, have some ideas? So what is feasible for Ukraine and towards what we can move? Maybe it's some global or just European analog of Pompeo Declaration, or some other things which may be presented as something real, as something attainable, something tangible. And maybe there are these discussions. And please reflect on what was mentioned by Mr. Minister as regards this general discussion on coexistence with Russia. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sergei. I would like to draw attention of all the participants and viewers of our discussion that we have very interesting data on Crimea as regards when Crimea can come back to Ukraine, what Ukrainians think in these terms. And it's very interesting that just 8% of Ukrainians believe that Ukraine cannot bring back the Crimea. All the others believe we can. 30% believe that it will take 10 years and more. And others are even more optimistic. They believe it's going to be up to 10 years. So in general, Ukrainians are quite optimistic about this. So, well, we shall talk about the average temperature within the whole country. Yes, Madam Ambassador Anka Feldkusen.
Briefly on Crimea, Germany, as also the EU in general, is supporting Ukraine's idea of a platform on Crimea, because we think it is important to keep the question of Crimea on the world agenda. We all know that crises come and go, and there are new crises, and old crises get forgotten. That should not happen. That cannot happen with Crimea. And I think the platform will be a possibility to achieve that goal. How it will be done concretely, this is something that we're discussing with the Ukrainians, with the foreign ministry, because, of course, sometimes it's good to get constructive feedback from outside when you want to establish a new platform, a new way of speaking about a very urgent issue for Ukraine. This process hasn't been finished. We're still in talks with the Ukrainians, and I think in the end we will have something that will achieve the goal that Ukraine has set in front of itself. Thank you.
Yes, I believe, speaking about Crimean platform, everything what was mentioned by Mr. Serhiy Sidorenko is the subject for discussion. Well, it can be a place for declarations, making declarations, but I would not get limited by that, because have a look. There is a range of problems in Crimea. Crimean Tatars, helping those illegally put behind bars, human rights. Well, this is all discussed at international fora, and UN is discussing it. Amnesty International is trying to take care of these issues, but somehow this issue gets lost within this all. So we can create some mechanisms, maybe even some funds, foundations, associations, maybe legal associations, which would be helping the prisoners in the Crimea, those who are monitoring the situation there, and some funds to conduct some, I don't know, information, awareness-raising campaigns in the Crimea as regards the position of Ukraine, support of the initiatives for the Crimeans, what is Ukraine is doing, simplification of certain bureaucratic procedures, and welcoming Crimean students in the Ukrainian higher educational institutions, etc. But I would like us to talk not just about Crimea. I believe there is a range of problems related to in what way Russia is annexing the territory of the Black Sea and Azov Sea. And in this context, I was very disappointed by Ukrainian position and position of the Western countries. I may not give you some specifics and tell you specifically about Germany, for example, but we remember that attack at the international waters, attack against Ukrainian ships. And what was the outcome? Any sanctions? Oh, well, whatever was approved was not real sanctions. You know, you remember this dialogue that we cannot strengthen the existing sanctions or introduce new ones. You know, the conflict is or was at this calm stage, and all of a sudden attack against Ukrainian ships. I'm not sure whether Madam Ambassador will agree or not, but these are not sanctions. Not the ones which shall be there. And then Ukrainian society started playing for the benefit of Russia, let's be frank. And the situation in the Black Sea and in the seas of Azov is very critical and painful. Alexander, any opinions of yours you would like to express? Well, I have a lot of thoughts as regards this. I try to get concentrated and give the floor to others. Let me be brief. A lot was mentioned about Russia. My position would be as follows. We shall not have illusions. We shall understand that these basics of our conflict with Russia would not be territorial, geographical. They don't pertain control over certain financial flows or territories. Well, these are some existential problems. They pertain to the fundamentals in what way we perceive our history and in what way actually Russians understand their history and their historical destiny. And we can make some panic conclusions, but we shall not do that. We shall be conscious of this being a long-term conflict of identities. And actually, it cannot be solved within even one generation, which is why we shall be based on our opportunity to move forward by way of minimizing the most acute risks, to safeguard ourselves, and not to have a very dramatic scenario. And we understand the range of steps which will enable this. And of course, we shall work strategically, work on the perspective. So it's important for the intellectuals of Ukraine to understand that it would be very harmful to spread some unsubstantiated expectations as regards resolution of the conflict within the nearest years. We just shall sit at this round table and have negotiations. That's it. We shall be ready for the dialogue, and then the conflict will be resolved. No, it's not a way out. It's not a way out. So, I'm not generalizing. No, I'm not saying everybody's saying that, but we shall be aware of the whole spectrum of opinions in Ukraine and globally. There are such illusions. There are these illusions in the West, in Ukraine, which is why this is my message to everyone here and in the West. Do not create unreasonable expectations which are not substantiated by anything, which are not supported by anything as regards a very speedy resolution of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which currently has these incarnations. So, clear-cut management of expectations, right, which shall be there in our diplomacy, in our foreign policy. But I would like to crown it all, to wrap up our discussion, in the first place, to express my gratitude to everyone, speakers, dear guests, dear viewers, those who were with us online, those who participated, and those who were watching it now or will be watching it later at New Europe Center website. And I would like to urge us, well, having this evidence base mentioned by Yevgen and having desire to strengthen the efficiency of foreign policy, make the Ukrainian diplomacy better by these joint efforts, by joint desire, and in the next year to work on our diplomacy to become more efficient, of a higher quality, more clear, and for it to have more support among the key stakeholders in Ukraine and globally, as well as among Ukrainian society. Because, well, thank you so much once again for participation, for this discussion, and see you in the next year, because this was the final event for New Europe Center in this year. Thank you so much.
21-й, 28-й.